Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
She kind of like hears a noise downstairs, so then she rushes downstairs, and she finds that same man that was at her door earlier in her house by her child, like staring at her child.
So the most recent theory or lead that has come out of this case, unfortunately, has to do with like pedophiles and child's like sex rings and things like that. And also there was like other stuff that came out that like someone had kidnapped her that wanted a child, because there was like that woman that came up to some guy and was like, "Oh, do you have my new daughter? Do you have my new daughter?"
There's just like so many cases out there that children gone missing, and like how many of those children have never been found that could be in these sex rings like for years and years. Like it's just so sickening to think of.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our season finale episode about the Madeleine McCann case. So obviously if you listened to part 1, we talked about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann and kind of this the timeline of events surrounding that, and also kind of our thoughts on the main theories that came out in the beginning about that man, Robert Murat, who they thought might have been involved, and also her parents, and we kind of debunked those theories or why we don't believe those were credible at all. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about potential other suspects that lead away from Madeleine's parents, and it's kind of like some strange occurrences that occurred in Portugal around the time that Madeleine went missing that are definitely suspicious and could be tied to her disappearance and could not be tied. So we're going to get into all of that. So obviously the two major theories, like I said, were Robert Murat and the parents, but also the documentary that we watched, The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann, that was on Netflix, does kind of go into a few other suspicious sort of scenarios or things that kind of happened that are definitely of note and I think are connected in some way. So there were some reports in Portugal of, I guess, around the time that Madeleine went missing, of these men who were like going up to tourists, or they were like going up to knocking on people's doors, and they were trying to raise money for an orphanage that apparently actually never, when they researched, never actually existed. But they were going to people's homes and asking them for this money for this orphanage. And then there's this one scenario of a mom who had this person come to her door, was talking to her about this orphanage, trying to get her to raise money. And the mom says that this whole time that she's talking to this man at the door, he's like facing her, but not really looking at her. He's kind of like looking past her to like something that's like behind her. And then when she like turns, she notices that like her daughter is like there. So this man is like standing at the door just staring at her daughter, which is like obviously super creepy and weird. So I guess she like makes some excuses too. She doesn't have any money, she can't donate or whatever, so trying to like get him away from the door. And then I'm kind of unclear if it's like the same day or maybe if it's like the next day, but the mom is like, I guess she's upstairs doing whatever she's doing upstairs, and then she kind of like hears a noise downstairs, so then she rushes downstairs, and she finds that same man that was at her door earlier in her house, like by her child, like staring at her child. And then like when she comes down the stairs, like scares him off and he like runs away. So that's like super weird, and obviously super sketchy. And obviously she reported this to the police, but that's kind of tied to like these other men that were also going around collecting money for this orphanage. That I guess when I said that they did research that apparently this orphanage was non-existent. So was this like just a scam to get just money? Like, was it just like a money sort of scam, or was it something more sinister where it was like a ploy in order to abduct children? Like, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it was obviously a scam to get money, but I also think it was like a tactic in like the child sex ring. I feel like they're collecting these children for that.
Like, do you think like the whole orphanage thing was just a ploy or like a story so that they would like just knock on doors and see like which houses had kids inside?
I think
like,
so, yeah.
You think like that was like...
Yeah.
So it wasn't about the money at all?
No.
Or like, because I was thinking like, as they mentioned that in the documentary, and I was thinking like, is it possible that these people are just like con artists who are just trying to scam people out of money, but they just so happen to be around the same time that Madeleine went missing?
I don't think it had anything to do with money, because when you're talking about that guy who was in that person's house and like staring at her child, like that just gives me the creeps. And like obviously he's there to like look at the child and nothing else but the child. And the fact that the mother was upstairs and he came in the house knowing that there was a child there, like he came back knowing that there was a child there. So it had nothing to do with money. I think it had to do with them going to the house. Maybe children answered the door, or maybe whoever answered the door, they noticed the children around. I think it was just all about the children, nothing about the money.
I think it could have been both. Like, they could have been trying to scam money, also at the same time seeing where kids lived and how old they were and things like that. But it also could have been not about the kids and about the money, but this particular guy who was involved in this scam had a thing for kids, you know? So it could have been just like him being sketchy when this whole scam wasn't actually about that. So I mean, it's really hard to say with just one isolated situation.
Yeah, I just remember like seeing that in the documentary. It just gives me the creeps. Like, that's so sketchy. Like, how did that mom? If I was that mom, I would have moved. Like that day, I would have moved out, never went back to that house. Like, that's so sketchy. He just runs away. Like, if she hadn't been so quick to, like, he could have been like literally seconds away from abducting the child and running out and never seeing it again. Like,
well, that's like the ultimate nightmare of like coming down the stairs or like waking up and like there's just like a random person standing in your house. Like, that's what scares me the most. I know.
I can't. I think, as much as a true crime person that I am, like, I'm almost my own worst enemy, because I hate watching shows that have children, like people like staring over me, or like kids getting it. Like, I just makes my like, just gives me the creeps.
Well, yeah, it's scary enough like if you don't have kids and there's some random person in your house, like that's scary. But then when you put kids like into that mix too, it's like even scarier. So it's just the worst.
Yeah, and it's sketchy that it's like she noticed it was the exact same man from the day. So it's like she kind of put the pieces together, like, oh, that whole thing about the orphanage was a ploy. He saw that I had my daughter here and then came back like the next day or that later that day to try to take her or something.
Like, so could you imagine if she didn't come downstairs at all? Like, within like
if she didn't happen to like hear a noise.
Yeah.
I think that's what like alerted her, and then she went down and then she saw him. Yeah. So if she didn't hear that noise, like the floor creaking or whatever, I don't know what it was. But like I said, it could have been like seconds away from taking the child and just running off. So it's super sketchy. And like, I think it's in the documentary they mentioned, are like, what are the chances that, like, do you think that it's connected to Madeleine in some way? It's like, what are the chances that there's this like creepy man, like almost abducting this little girl and asking about orphanages, and like, do you think that's just a coincidence that it just happens to be in the same area of the same resort in the days leading up to Madeleine missing? Like, it wasn't too far away from that. Like, I think it was like a week, or it was like really close in time to that. So what are the chances? But then I think, like, obviously she would have described this man. She saw him twice, so she would have had fairly a good description. And then, like, I guess she obviously would have went to the police with that. So then obviously nothing really came of that, or they weren't able to like tie that to Madeleine directly. But what are the chances that like those two separate things are not related? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that's really hard to say. Like, it is, I don't know, like, I don't think it would be a coincidence, but I mean, it could be. Like, it's just hard to say. Like, I don't know. I just find it just
like,
really
this is
creepy,
a small
like,
sort of town. Like, Portugal has quite a small population, and like the small town or area of Portugal is not super populated. Like, obviously there's people there, and like it's a big tourist town. So like, I just think, like, given the size of the population, it's like, I feel like it's a very strong coincidence to think that like those two things would have just happened within like very close together and not be somewhat related.
Yeah, I think that they could be related because it seems like a brazen thing to do to break into an apartment that's so populated on this resort, and I think like that's it's like a really brave thing for someone to attempt. But then for someone to actually come into your house, that you've like someone to come into someone's house after they've already seen you and then come back to like get your kid when you're upstairs, like that's also a very brazen thing to do. So I feel like
in the middle of the day, it was like daytime.
So I feel like after that, what happened to Madeleine was almost like easier, right? Because there was no adult around, and it was just easier to grab her at night rather than in the middle of the day. It was like, oh, this is an easy target, even though for most people it really wouldn't be in a way. So I feel like, and when you see this documentary and investigate this case, like how much child sex trafficking there is around the world, and even in this area, it kind of seems like, well, that's not a stretch to feel like there could be this whole connected ring of kidnaps.
Well, that's why I think there's like a disconnect between, because I think like this area, like of course, like the feds and like people say that like it's, Portugal's a relatively safe country, and like this area is like, it's like the McCanns felt that it was so safe that they felt safe leaving the doors unlocked and their kids inside. So it's a kind of a disconnect between that and like all of this kind of sketchy stuff happening. It seems like a very unsafe place to be. And then when you go into some of like the people that they say were in the area that could be tied to Madeleine's disappearance, like this place isn't safe. It's like a fucking like cesspool of like creeps.
People don't know that though. And also I think it was from this 60-minute Australia episode called Maddie and the Monster. Or it could have been this other Netflix documentaries. They said that at the time that Madeleine disappeared, there wasn't like a sex offender registry set up for Portugal. So it's like they didn't even know who was around that area when this happened, like who was involved in sex crimes, because it just wasn't set up. So I feel like it was happening, but people didn't know about it because things like that didn't exist at this time. Yeah,
that's true. But then also, I'm pretty sure it was that Netflix documentary as well, that there was an incident, I think it was like a couple of nights before Madeleine was taken, where like Maddie had mentioned to her mother something about, why didn't you come when we were crying before? Kind of insinuating that like something had happened that woke the children up, and then they were crying, that maybe someone had been there before, and like they were in the room or in the house and it woke them up, and then they started crying and it scared them, so they ran away.
Oh yeah, I remember that. And then like when they actually took Maddie, it was like the second attempt and they were successful.
Yeah, and like by that time they knew how to get in more because they had been there before.
I feel like they're so determined to get this one girl though. You'd think like if they tried and then that happened, it'd be like, okay, well that was close, I'm not doing that again. But I guess if they were professionals and they were used to this kind of thing, like that one little thing isn't going to scare them off.
Yeah, that's true. But also like, why wouldn't that have alerted Kate? Like if her child says, why didn't you come when we were crying? Or I guess there would have been a million reasons why they were crying. But like, that would have been weird that like that would have happened, and then they would have like the next night again left the doors unlocked. Like I don't want to get back into the parents, but
yeah. But I feel like every time your kid cries, I don't think every parent rushes over to their kid every time they cry. Especially at night if they're crying, like let's just leave, they go back to sleep. So I feel like them crying and Kate not running is not a red flag.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I guess like, but also too, wasn't it? I think you maybe mentioned this in part one, that it's like the door to the apartment wasn't visible from the table they were at, right? Like the apartment itself was, but like the door that was unlocked wasn't visible. So like someone could have went in there without being seen, right?
Yeah, like there really wasn't a clear view, like the parents kind of made it seem like there was, because there, like the way their restaurant was, there was like the canopy of the restaurant, like the plastic, so you kind of had to like maybe situate yourself, like sit down and like look up over to kind of see the apartment. So being able to be exactly sure what was happening at every second wasn't possible. It wasn't like a straight shot to the apartment kind of thing.
Yeah, but then also kind of tied to, I don't think it's tied to like the orphanage kind of scam thing, or maybe it is, but there was also reports that like somebody had, I think they mentioned this in the documentary too, it's like somebody who would like during the day, either that day, earlier the same day that she had actually was abducted, somebody had like noticed like someone walking out of the gate or something. Don't you remember seeing that in the documentary? It's like somebody had seen somebody kind of exiting, either like, I don't know if it was for that apartment or maybe it was like for the next apartment, but like there were like reports that like there was like a man like standing outside the apartment for a long period of time, kind of like maybe staking it out. I don't know if it was that apartment or the next door apartment. Or then there was like another report of like there was a man seen like exiting through that patio door or through like a gate, kind of looking like flustered or sort of like agitated or something. So it's like we're reports of like men like being creepy and like standing around that area for like staking it out or something.
Yeah, I heard that when I was watching the documentary. I saw they mentioned that. It's kind of creepy how many people they seen coming, like men creepily coming in and out of that. Like that's just creepy to me. Like it wasn't just one person.
It's like this resort. Like there's people around that are not stalking, but like keeping eye on. That's why it's like could have been like on the 6th night. It's like that's why they had such the same routine every night. So it's like that person could have been like staking out that apartment for like many nights leading up to that, and was like, oh, around this time they're always out, so I'm gonna like make my like kind of new sort of a routine.
So I remember there was like reports of multiple witnesses saying that they saw a man, and they described him like he had like pockmarked face or something, like he had stuff on his face, or maybe it was like
he was really fucking ugly.
Yeah, they said he was like an ugly guy. He had like an ugly face. Like poor guy if it's just like some local, but and also like so pockmarked face, or like I think of like someone has really bad acne and they have like the scars left behind. So that's kind of what I pictured. And also there was like reports of like two or a couple blonde guys that were kind of like hanging around and kind of like talking to each other, but they were there constantly or consistently that people noticed them and people didn't really know who they were. So there was definitely reports of like different people hanging around. And I think it's a good point that maybe somebody noticed the routine that this family had. Like every night at 8:30 they were away from the apartment and left their kids. But also it comes out that the restaurant, like the guest book was like out in the open, or it was like available to the public. And so it was reported in that guest book the reason why that they let this whole group of people book that same table every night was because that they wanted to be close to their apartment because they were leaving their kids unattended. And that, like, anybody could read that. So somebody could have seen that and been like, okay, like, now we know who our target's going to be. And so they wouldn't even have to notice the routine. Like, it was written out for them. So that was, like, a really big mistake.
I feel like there was really, like, lack in security or lack in, like... lack in security all around in that resort. Like, as big as it was and as popular it was, you feel like there'd be more, like, cracked down on security for certain things. Especially like a guest book, because usually when we go to, I mean, I don't go to fancy restaurants where I have to like sign a guest book. Well, now I do because of COVID, but still, like I don't like, you know what I mean though. Like it's out in the open, like it's out. Like not most guest books that I know are out in the open for the whole entire like people coming and going to see. Like,
and not only like the really guest, and not even like just the guest book, but like a description of like why they're booking the table. Like, is that relevant? Like, why would they need that in the guest book or like in the reservation or like out in the open? Like, why would it need to have a detail like, oh yeah, they're leaving their children unattended with unlocked, I don't know if it said unlocked doors, but you know, leaving their children unattended in this apartment, that's why they need this table. Like, that's super weird.
I don't know. Like, I remember in that documentary and like one of the guests was saying like, well, how is it fair that this one group can book this table for the whole week when everybody else has to do it that the day of in the morning? And he's like, oh well, it's because, you know, they needed it for this reason. And maybe, I don't know, maybe like the restaurant was like getting that question asked all the time, like why it's not fair that these people get this table every night. And they're like, well, here, just look, here's the guest book, here's the reason why we do stuff. So
they're giving that out to the public? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. It's because their children are unattended in that apartment. Like, that seems weird. Like, I think I could understand if maybe it was like a note that like for the staff, like, you know, if like saying like, okay, this family's booking the same table every night because of this reason, but like for them to like be publicly telling the guests that is weird, I think.
It is weird. Like, it doesn't make sense why they would do that. And it probably because, and I mean, it probably was a relatively safe place. Like, everyone says, oh, this is like a safe town, this doesn't happen. It was like a safe resort. And so something like this ever happened there before. So nobody was thinking that this was going to happen. People's guards were definitely down, right? They weren't thinking that this was going to happen because it never had before.
I don't know if this ever came up in the documentary, or like, do you think it's possible, if it's another theory, that like, do you think like maybe there was like people who were on staff were in cahoots with, you know, like people on staff could, if people are privy to that information, Like,
that was brought up in the documentary, like briefly.
Yeah.
It was mentioned that somebody on staff in that restaurant knew the routine of this family and alerted, someone they worked with, like in a sex ring or whatever, or someone they knew that was into kidnapping kids, and they told them about it, and that's how these people knew about it. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Like, you would have to know where Madeleine or where these children were staying. Like, you would have to, like, because there's all kinds of different apartments. Like, you would have to know where these kids were for you to come in, get the kid, and go out. Like, you'd have to know your way around the resort. You'd have to know, like, what time these kids were going to be sleeping and where they were specifically were.
Like, you would have to I feel like it would be someone, exactly, like it would have to be someone who knew the routine, who knew that the door was going to be unlocked, or who knew that they were going to be away from the apartment at this time, because it's like ballsy to just like break into someone's home. You don't know if that someone's going to be home or something. Like, so I feel like it had to be someone who at least was keeping tabs on what the routine was throughout that week,
I guess,
and know that the door is going to be unlocked.
Yeah, because it could have also been luck, but when you think about that guy that just walked into that house when that woman was just upstairs in the middle of the day, so like breaking into an apartment in the middle of the night doesn't seem like that far of a stretch. But
it wasn't the middle of the night either, though. It was like 9 p.m.
Well, I guess,
10. Like, it's not even.
It's still like a reasonable person to be like, well, the kids are probably asleep at that time, and maybe everybody else is too. Maybe they're tired. They just think everyone's sleeping. I don't know, but it doesn't.
But you'd also have to like know like what the child looks like. So you'd have to like in the middle of the day, if they're out, like you'd have to like be spying on them to know their routine.
Well, yeah, that was kind of one of the theories was like someone watched them and knew where they were staying and knew they'd be away
like,
at this time.
It could have been somebody working at the kiddie club, knowing like who they are and like when they're going to be there, when they're not going to be there, and when they're going to go to sleep and where they are staying.
It could have, and it also just could have been a coincidence. Somebody was like testing the doors and this one was unlocked, so they went in. If the door was locked, maybe it would have been a different story.
It also shows like very like lack of security, like because if I think of a resort or even if a hotel room, like you can't just go and look and people like go upstairs and look in people's rooms. You have to have like a key. You'd have to have like.
But it wasn't like I think I say like resort, but it wasn't like a resort in the traditional sense that you would think of. Like it's not like, like in Mexico when you go to a resort where it's like. It's very much like you're on the resort and it's like, a very secluded area. It's kind of like that's like a resorty sort of area for tourists, but it's not like separated from the rest of the town. I feel like it's kind of dispersed among sort of like the people who live there. Like what's his name? Like Robert Murat, like his house was literally feet away from that apartment. So he's like someone who lives there. He's a local and he's living like right next to the resort and has easy-ish access. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when you say resort, it's not like one time I went to a resort in Mexico, it was like you go on like a shuttle and they take you like down the road and then they open up like these gates to the resort and like then the gates close behind you and everything is like you can't get off the resort unless you go through there and like people can't come into the resort. It's like and people are like don't leave the resort because it's not a safe place. But
it's
like
not like
this,
that.
No, this was just like a big building with like apartments around it and like a pool in the town. So it was just like you could walk down the street and go into the resort if you wanted.
But don't you have like is it kind of like a hotel, like a reception desk where you have to go and like see?
No, it's not like
there?
a hotel. Like there's no lobby. It's like separate apartments.
Oh, okay.
Like you saw the documentary, they show like the layout.
Yeah, I just figured
it's like not like a hotel.
Like when I think of like a resort, I feel or like anything you go into and there's like a lobby there and like the receptionist and you have to like ask for like a room key and like ask for who's there. Like that's what.
Well, there probably is. Like they probably give you keys to your room, like your apartment and stuff. If that's part of the resort, or these apartments just could have been separate, close to the resort. Like you know what I mean.
Well, it was like the Ocean Club, wasn't it? It was like that was the name of the whole place. Was the Ocean Club?
Resort. Yeah, and I mean there probably was somewhere where you go in to pay and get your keys and stuff and like, whatever. But there wasn't like a hotel where you go up the elevator. It was like just apartments everywhere. So yeah.
So yeah, I guess we should clarify that in the first part. Like when we say resort, it's not like what you potentially like the average person would think of as a resort. It's not like like a gated community that's separate from the rest. It's like you can like walk in and out of the resort. Like a few steps away from there, you're on like the public streets. So it's like
I
kind of
did say that at
intermingled.
the beginning. I said yeah, I said like this part of the resort anyway, it was like apartments all around with like a pool in the middle, and then I said their apartment was right by the street, right, where people could walk by.
Yeah. So yeah, it was very much like it's possible. Like obviously somebody can walk in, like, and it's because of that somebody can walk in and abduct a child, right? Because it is so like easy for someone off the street to just walk in. Whereas if it had been like a more closed off resort, it's like, you know, and that's why I think like that's the draw to this resort. It's like because you don't feel like you're in like a touristy resort. Like you're actually like kind of part of the community in a way.
Yeah,
you're on a resort, but you're like still a part of like the town.
Mm-hmm. And it was like a kid-friendly resort, so it was people would go there if they have kids, probably, and people that like kids. Oh, I guess anyone who liked kids could be there. So, but like people that are gonna pay to be in like a resort like that, usually it's because they have kids. So.
And I guess it does seem kind of weird that it's like if you're having a kid-friendly resort that you could have it be so easy for a random stranger to walk. It's like, and if you're a local, it's like, well, you know that this is a kid resort. So if you're like a creep, you know that there's going to be kids there. So it's like creepy.
Yeah, so it really wasn't secure in that way where like the public was like excluded. They really weren't. They could come and go as they wanted.
But obviously the parents felt safe enough to leave their kids there while they went to eat.
Yeah, so that was like just some random weird occurrences that were happening in like the area of town or in that near the resort. So I definitely don't think those are just coincidences that like these random men are just like being creeps and like just like staking out like areas surrounding the apartment. I feel like maybe it's tied to that. But then also there was quite a high profile case that's mentioned in this Netflix documentary about Madeleine's case, and it is the murder of Joanna Cipriano. And this was actually a murder that occurred in 2004, or I guess it's a missing persons technically. I don't know. It's like whether it's missing persons case or a murder, but it happened in 2004, which would have been 3 years before Madeleine went missing. But it was also another high profile case that happened in the Algarve region of Portugal. And it was the disappearance of, she would have been 8 years old, I believe, at that time. And eventually her mother and her uncle were found guilty of the disappearance/murder. But there was never any body that was ever found. But the story was that her mother had, I guess, walked in on like the uncle and the child engaged in like incestuous sex or something. So then they murdered the child, and the uncle apparently or allegedly admitted to chopping up the body and then throwing it into like a local pigsty and stuff, but they never found the body. And then they took the mother in for interrogation. And this is like this is the PJ. So it's the same police department that's involved in Madeleine's case. But there's pictures of the mom after her interrogation where she's just covered in bruises. It looks like she'd been horribly beaten up. And then there were allegations of abuse that the police basically tortured her and forced her into giving a confession, because she does confess to the murder and she gives this story. But then later, like the day after she signs the confession, she like recants the story. She says that never happened, and basically the police tortured her until she gave that confession. But then the police say, well, no, she threw herself down a flight of stairs trying to commit suicide, and that's why she had all of those sort of marks all over her. Eventually she did go to trial and she was convicted, and they were convicted of the murder. They spent 16 years in jail. Both the mother and the uncle spent 16 years in jail, or were sentenced to 16 years in jail. And apparently it's it's the first ever murder case in Portugal that took place without a body. So they never actually ended up finding the body. So there's speculation of like, maybe it's just a missing persons case. Maybe she's still alive somewhere, because they never did find conclusively whatever happened to her. But the mom was saying that she didn't kill her, and then all of this stuff. So it's like a whole like controversy there. And I think that's brought up in Madeleine's story, just to kind of showcase like the PJ and like how kind of shady they could be. And there were some officers that were charged with like misconduct in that case. So they're saying like it's not impossible to think that like there was also misconduct in Madeleine's case. So I think that's where they kind of drew that comparison.
Yeah, and it also came out that, so this guy, he was interviewed in that Netflix documentary, and he was the former chief investigation coordinator. His name was Gangal Amaral. And so he's in it quite a lot, and he's kind of talking about the case, but he ended up writing a book about this case, and it was very much towards like the parents being guilty. And he was kind of going into some of the evidence that they had that they never released and kind of like why they were guilty, and it was very defamatory. And so kind of like someone that's inside the police department coming out with this book, and like it shows him at book signings and stuff like that, like kind of trying to make money off this case. That is a very sketchy thing to do, I feel. And also like he got in trouble for that. Like the family sued him and he was ordered to stop, like they weren't allowed to publish any more books or sell any more books, and I think like the family got money because of that, like the defamatory things he was saying. So that's like very not appropriate for someone inside the police force to write a book about a case, like and like blame and like point a finger at the family. So
and it was like a documentary too that came out in Portugal, like to tie into the book.
Not a good look.
Yeah, and also I guess that's also why they brought that case, because he was also involved in that case of Joanna Cipriano. Like he was one of the officers investigating that case, and it's alleged, or it says that he was not present at the time that this mother was tortured or beaten, but like he was kind of tied in there as well. So I guess it kind of just shows you that he's kind of a corrupt person. I'm not saying that he was like involved in Madeleine's disappearance, but he obviously isn't like above being sketchy.
Yeah, it feels like he had like definitely a financial motive to blame the parents and like make it look like they did it almost.
Yeah. So those were kind of a few other interesting things that were brought up in the documentary, but there is like kind of the newest sort of revelation that came out, or newest suspect that's being looked at. Katie, I know you have more information on that.
Yeah, I'll get into that. Also, just as an aside, I want to say like some of the things that they brought up in this Netflix documentary about like some of the sex trafficking rings that are out there, like they go into like the dark web and how sketchy that is. And I mean, obviously there's no way for us to know how sketchy that is because I've never been to the dark web, and you like can't get to those places unless you are like a investigator or like a really shitty person. And but like some of the things they say, how like in like overseas and some of the poorer countries, they just like rich men will fly in on their planes and like just grab a child, do whatever they want with it for a couple of days, and then just drop it back off at like the dump where they live. And like, this is just things that people know about, and I'm just like, where is like the mass media on these kind of things? Like, you know, they just like
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, they briefly mention this and then like they move on. And like one of the guys in the Netflix documentary is very much like, we have to get the word out there about this kind of thing. So I feel like that's something that's very underreported, just as an aside, because that struck me as like, holy shit, like you don't know these things are happening because you don't do a Google search and these things come up, right? It's very like hidden, dark things that are out there. Anyway,
I don't understand why most of our cases that we've done this season and last season have to do with shoddy police work. Like, I don't understand.
I mean, I feel like it's just because, like, I mean, some of these cases aren't, because the police are human, they make mistakes. That happens. And so, you know, they do things they shouldn't, and we know about it because it's in the media. But also, yeah, there is just a lot of things that is shady.
I just don't understand why that police officer who made that book or that documentary, like, I don't understand what he gained from that. Like, that's just a horrible thing to do. Like, what kind of person are you?
Yeah, it's money. You got money from the book.
But I don't know, that's just like a shitty person.
Well, it's just interesting too, because like I was actually saying this before we started recording, but this is, I think, our first case that we've covered outside of North America, and like a lot of our cases do involve like police misconduct or like shoddy investigations and stuff like that. So it's like, obviously that's not just a North American thing, like it happens everywhere. So here you go to a case that's on the other side of the world in Portugal, and there's still the same things are happening, the same corruption. I mean, it's not strictly like, it's not restricted to like a certain country. It's like the whole fucking world's corrupt at this point. But you know, it's like the police department is like doing the same thing, like following leads or like trying to frame people or trying to do all this stuff. Like, it's crazy that like those same sort of themes are popping up even in little old Portugal.
Yeah, because there's just like corrupt, shitty people all over the world. So the most recent theory or lead that has come out of this case, unfortunately, has to do with like pedophiles and child's like sex rings and things like that. But so there's a man named Christian Brueckner, and he lived just like over a kilometer away from where Madeleine and her family were staying. in Portugal, and he was a sex offender, and he had raped a young girl in the past, and he had actually raped an elderly woman who was a guest at the same resort that the McCanns were staying at. And so yeah, like I said before, like in Portugal at that time, there was no official sex offender registry, and so he lived so close to that resort, but there was really no record of him. And he was actually not a registered resident of Portugal, I guess. Like, he had fled Germany after a conviction of raping a young girl when he was only 17, and so he fled Germany and was living in Portugal, but there was never like an official documentation that he lived there as a resident, so he was kind of like just like a drifter kind of person, even though he had lived there for like 10 years. But I guess if you don't register yourself, there's no way for anyone to track you, which is like the whole point, and that's why he did that. So he was actually arrested for an unrelated crime, and rather than tell the authorities his address, like where he was living in Portugal, he just chose to stay in jail for like 8 more months. So I guess they must have been like, well, if you tell us where you live, you know, you're cooperating, we'll reduce your sentence. But he decided not to do that and just like stayed in jail for this full 8 months. And while he was in jail, he got one of his friends to go over to his house and gather up like all of his computers, all his hard drives and cameras, and get rid of them, so that when the police actually did go to search his house, they didn't find any of that stuff. But it does come out that more recently they kind of dug up his yard. They figured out where he did live, and they found over like 8,000 videos recovered that was buried in his yard underneath the body of his dead dog. And so yeah, they obviously found that this guy, he would like videotape all of his crimes. So I don't know, like 8,000 videos. I'm assuming some of them must have been of the same people, just like long videos. I can't imagine it was like 8,000 different victims. But either way, they found these disturbing videos of, and there was a video of when he raped that elderly woman. Like there was a video of that as well. And they also searched like his RV that was on his property, and they found lots of bathing suits of young girls that were in that RV. In the place where this resort was, the Praia de Luz, he was known by the locals for a lot of burglaries that he had committed. He would burglarize like vacation rentals in the area. And it was in November of 2005 when he raped that 72-year-old woman. And he did that after he broke into her vacation home. And there was also evidence that he tortured her as well when they found that videotape of it. And so he was like a very, like they're like, yeah, he's a sociopath, he's very violent, and this is like his thing where he likes to rape and torture and videotape people. And so they're thinking like he could be like a serial killer, but they don't have enough evidence for it. So soon after Madeleine disappeared, this guy, Christian, fled back to Germany. And throughout his past, like he had many young teenage girlfriends, and he was very physically abusive. And he would often talk to his friends and like tell people that he wanted to build a cellar, kind of like similar to a cellar that there's another case, like I forget the guy's name, but Fritzl, where he kept
Joseph Fritzl or something.
Yeah, Joseph Fritzl, where he kept his own daughter for like 24 years in a cellar, and nobody knew she was down there. So he would talk about things like that. And they actually did find like a hidden cellar that he had on one of the properties of where he used to live. And so he's just like that kind of guy, just like a scumbag. And that was kind of his thing, like this like just morbid, violent, gross kind of stuff. You know, a fascination with like kids. So they have all this evidence, and he is actually in jail. Like he was convicted of some crime that made him, so he's in jail for like 7 years. And so a German prosecutor named Hans Christian Wolters, who was involved in Madeleine's case, he was interviewed for this 60 Minutes Australia documentary, and he officially says that they have enough evidence to suggest that Madeleine is dead and that Christian actually killed her. But he can't go into detail. And so just to clarify, like, this episode of the 60 Minutes Australia called Maddie and the Monster came out in October of 2020. And so this guy at the time, he's interviewed, and he says that they have enough evidence to suggest that Madeleine is dead and that Christian Brueckner killed her. And he can't go into detail about why they have reached that conclusion, but he can say that that's the conclusion that they've come to. And he says that they have known this for a couple of years, so around like 2018-ish. And they say that they can place him at the scene of Madeleine's abduction. And they found phone records that can corroborate that as well, because it shows that Christian was likely tipped off that night that there was children left alone in that apartment. And there's phone records that show he was outside the apartment that night in the same time frame where Madeleine disappeared. So it seems like, you know, circumstantial, but super compelling. And Christian was also identified by someone who recognized a sketch that an artist had done of some of the people that they saw lurking around the apartment, and said that that's how they caught him, because someone recognized him. Oh, this looks like this guy, and that's where they went to go find him. But the police made a mistake, because they sent Christian a letter saying, oh, we think you are a witness to the Madeleine McCann case, so can you come and talk to us about it? And that kind of tipped him off that he was a suspect, and he fled. But like I said, he was, caught for another crime, and he's in jail at this time. But this was over a year ago that this came out, and there's nothing concrete saying that he's official suspect in this case. They haven't charged him with anything, and so I'm thinking maybe since he's already in jail, that they think they have more time to kind of build up a solid case. But Christian himself is saying they don't have enough evidence. They're never going to be able to have enough evidence to pin me to this. So he's not cooperating. He's not going to confess. And so, but the police.
So he's not saying he didn't do it. He's just saying they don't have enough evidence to pin me.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think that's what he's saying. He's basically saying they're never going to be able to, find enough evidence that it was me. But I feel what do they have that made them so convinced that Madeleine's dead and that he did it? And if they have that much evidence, why hasn't he been charged or convicted for it yet? This is over a year ago. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's why it's because I think I saw that 60 Minutes thing a while ago, shortly after it came out or something, and I was it seems pretty in the way they present it anyway. It's oh, well, this is the guy, it's solved after all these years. But then nothing ever came out after that, no update. He hasn't been charged, nothing further. So I'm how can something so damning result in no charges or anything? No follow-up?
Yeah. That's when we first talked about doing this case. I was well, that's solved, I think. Because I remember them being yeah, this guy definitely did it. So I'm okay, that's solved. But it actually isn't, because nothing else has come out about it. So it's kind of what's going on?
What's sketchy about it for me is that he's not denying that he didn't do it. He's not saying he did, but he's also not saying he didn't. So to me, when people when suspects or people like that don't deny something, it's what do they know? They must know something. Yeah, it's if you didn't do something, you're gonna be oh no, that was not me, right off the get-go. But if he's not saying anything, it's okay, well, that's just sketchy to me. And I think maybe they don't have enough to charge him with Madeleine's with Madeleine's disappearance, but I'm sure they have enough evidence to charge him with other things that he has done. He's obviously in jail for that reason, but I hope that he's the person and they finally found it, but I don't know.
I guess that is a logical conclusion to come to. If the cell phone records do corroborate that he was in that area around the time she got abducted, and he also has this history of being a disgusting creep, it's well, then, okay, you can probably say, if he was in that area, what are the chances that someone else also with similar intentions is also in the area doing it?
Well, yeah, and one of his ex-girlfriends had come forward saying that he said that somebody had brought up the Madeleine McCann case, and he's oh yeah, I know what happened, I was there when she disappeared, but he wouldn't go into more detail. He's I'm not an idiot, I'm not gonna talk about it. And so, but he kind of said that when he was drunk or something, and then she found child porn on his phone or his computer, and when she confronted him about it, he beat her up pretty bad and pushed her down the stairs. So he has that violent nature, as we know, and he obviously he's into child porn, and he was there the night Madeleine disappeared, and he's a fucking scumbag. So everything points to him, and as bad as it seems, yeah, I kind of well, almost hopeful that it is him, so the search is over and we know. But obviously what he would have done to her is not something anybody wants to think about. So it's a really bad ending, I feel.
What a disgusting person. Did you say that was his girlfriend who said that? How does he have a girlfriend? My question.
Well, it's one of his ex-girlfriends. Yeah,
No. That's crazy. But then he's also said, like, if according to his own story, like, if that is true. Also, I find a weird story that you said, like, he said that he knows what happened to her, but then he's not going to, like, go into more detail. It's like, well, why would you even say anything then? If you're like, oh, I'm not an idiot, I'm not going to go into details. Well, then you don't have to say anything at all.
I know.
But you are.
It almost like he wants to brag. It's like this, like one of the hugest cases in the world, like worldwide, and he's like, yeah, like I have info on that. And it's kind of like even just like holding it over people's heads. He's like, but I'm not going to say anything about it. Like, just,
I mean,
like,
it also
that
makes
kind
it.
of asshole.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes it seem like it wouldn't be him. Like somebody who's going to say that wouldn't be the one who did it. I don't know. To me,
But
anyway.
people who also do things like that, like, I mean, there's different types of people who kill people and they keep it silent. But some people who kill, like, boast about it because they're like, it's a thrill for them and it's like the attention they want to get, and it's like.
But there are a lot of times where you'll hear stories of like inmates who will brag about, you know, doing a murder, and then they find out, well, like, that wasn't true. They were just saying that. It's like people love to just sort of, like, if he was really that kind of creep, it's like he wanted like the badge of honor, as disgusting as it is, to like, oh, I was the one who was responsible for the most, like, one of the most popular missing persons cases in the world. So it's like almost like, and like he didn't, I mean, is there, I guess I was going to say, was there evidence that he was like bragging about all the other murders he did or all the other crimes he committed? It's like, why is that the one that he's out there bragging about?
I feel like he's fantasizing about, maybe he didn't do it to Madeleine, but because it's such a wide case, like he has fantasized about what he would have done to Madeleine if he got there first, if he didn't do it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like, or he wishes it was him because he'd like be famous, kind of thing.
A disgusting person.
It's so high profile.
But like, what are the chances that, like, if it's, like I said, his cell phone pings in like that area right around the time she's abducted, like, this is a disgusting monster. Like, obviously, yeah, like I said, it's a logical conclusion to jump to.
Yeah, and they're saying like he didn't work alone. Like, he was tipped off by somebody that knew that Madeleine was going to be left alone. So that goes back to the thing, like, well, maybe it was people that worked in the restaurant, or maybe someone that worked at the hotel or the resort, like, knew the routine and were like, yeah, at this time they're going to be left alone. So, and he was like right there.
It also like really shocks me that like at the time or like now that they don't have like a sex offender registry in that area.
Well, they might now. This was just back when she disappeared in 2007. They didn't.
Oh, okay. But I feel like that's off, like, maybe, like, I know, like where I live, like, that was something you'd know back then. Like, if you looked it up, you'd see who was, like, living in your area that was a pedophile. But I feel like...
Well, every country is different.
True, I guess. But
I mean, I can guarantee you they probably do now. Because it seems like there was a lot of creepers in the area.
Yeah, it's disgusting about how many of those, like, pedophiles and, like, sex offenders actually live in certain communities. It's, like, scary to think about. Also,
do you think? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say. Do you think Christian could be that guy who like walked in and that woman saw her about to abduct her child? Like,
I don't know. Like, is there a sketch of that person? Like, do they ever make release a sketch?
Well, that's what I said. Like, I don't think. I'm assuming she would have. She obviously got two good looks at him. She would have, like, when she reported to the police, I'm sure she would have described this man. But I've never seen like a sketch that ever came out about it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, in this 60 Minutes documentary, they kind of show like two different sketches that they feel like are the same person, but they came from two different people, so they're similar but two different person. They say when you kind of put them both together, they look like Christian, but I don't think it really looks like him at all. They're kind of like maybe pushing that a bit, but I mean, either way, he's a scumbag and probably should be in jail forever. Whether that's going to happen, like, whether they're just like taking their time to gather enough evidence so that it's like a slam dunk in jail, or whether they really have met a dead end, I don't know. Like, it's I don't know when he went in jail. I don't know when he's going to be released because he's only in there for 7 years. So,
which is crazy to think it's only 7 years.
I know.
But like, I just find it weird. It's like, why would you go public and say we have all this evidence, and then like, why would not just wait until you have everything you need and then release it? It's like, this, we got this guy. It's like, why would you release just enough to be like, well, it probably was him, but like, we're still looking for more. It's like, why not just wait until?
Well, he officially he said like, yes, we, have enough evidence to say that Madeleine is dead, and enough evidence to say that Christian Brueckner did it. But that's all they're saying. And a year later, nothing else has come out about that. So I'm thinking maybe they just are keeping it close to their chest until they...
How do they know that Madeleine's dead? Did he say that he was?
I was saying they have enough evidence to say that she is, but they haven't released anything out why they know that. And I'm thinking maybe...
Is that tied? Yeah, I was going to say, is that tied to what they found, like buried? Like,
That's
she
what I'm
was one of the
thinking.
people on those videos.
It's horrible that the parents have to find out that she's dead, but maybe it gives them kind of like a sense of relief as well, that she like could have died like right away, so she wasn't like tortured or whatever. But
Yeah, just like know what happened to her, I feel like.
but saying that she is dead and then like say like a couple years down the road they find out that she actually is alive, that's just like horrible in itself.
Also, like another little theory that came out in the 60 Minutes documentary was like, almost, I think like the night that Madeleine was missing, someone had reported that they saw a couple, and they were like clutching like a kid in their arms, and they were like, it was almost like they were running away from something, and like when the headlights hit them, it was almost like, oh my god, they were trying to hide what they had, and they kind of like ran across the street like into the woods or something. And so even though someone reported this, because they're like, this looks like these people should not be having this kid, but the police like didn't look into it until like over a year later, and of course at that point they're like, who the fuck were these people? And there's nothing that ever came from that. And also there was like other stuff that came out that like someone had kidnapped her that wanted a child, because there was like that woman that came up, I think this was in the documentary, that woman that came up to some guy and was like, oh, do you have my new daughter? Do you have my new daughter? I don't know how that's related or why they would think that's related,
so
but
weird.
it happened like so close to when Madeleine disappeared to think like, oh, maybe someone kidnapped her to give to this woman. But I'm thinking like, if someone's looking for a new daughter, that's almost like the best case scenario for this kind of thing, because it's like somebody is looking for a kid that they're going to take care of, and if Madeleine went with someone like that, then at least she's like happy and alive somewhere, rather than, you know,
Like, yeah, wasn't it like it was in another city or something? It was like a woman went up to this guy. I kept saying, do you have my new daughter? You're the man with my new daughter. You're going to bring me my new daughter or something?
yeah, and then she realized that's not the person that she was looking for, and then left, and like nothing ever came out from that. It was like, what the hell? I don't
And
know
that was
why
like the same day that Madeleine went missing, or like the day after or something, right? It was like very close.
Yeah, it was super close. That's probably why they connected it, because like, oh, Madeleine goes missing, and then this woman is looking for her new daughter. I think that's a stretch to feel like they're connected, especially it's not even the same city. Like,
Yeah, that is weird. So what, like there's like a business where somebody just goes and takes someone's child, and then someone else buys her? And I mean, I get, obviously, but like someone else.
yeah,
Like, who's
some
this
people can't
woman? They
have-
never said who that woman was.
No, they have like a sketch of her, and they say that it's like a Victoria Beckham lookalike, but it doesn't look like her at all, I feel. And I don't know, I guess
Isn't it like a
people-
woman with like short hair or something? And then
yeah,
they
it
said it's
was.
Victoria
Yeah, like
Beckham
a buzz
lookalike.
cut hair. Yeah, and then big nose. Like,
It's so weird. It's like, do they not? Different
they're-
Victoria Beckham or something? I don't know.
yeah, maybe it's a different Victoria Beckham. But anyway, yeah, I guess maybe some people are just so desperate for, you know, to have a kid that they'll kidnap somebody else's kid, which is like, I guess, best case scenario in a kidnapping, if you want to look at it like that way. But I don't know.
That's so weird. It's like that's just another like strange coincidence. That, like, it's weird to like have all these like different things happening. It's like you have those like orphanage people who are like, that happens, and then these random people who are like spotted like the day of, like lingering around the apartment, and then this other woman who's asking for her new daughter. Like all these things happening all around the same time. Like it's so weird. Like, how are all of these things happening simultaneously? Are they
I
all
know.
connected, or are they just completely separate things that just happen to happen at the same time?
Well, it's scary to think that so many of these possibilities could have happened. Like, there's so many people out there that are looking to kidnap a kid for all these different reasons, and like, you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's going to be your kid. Like, it's terrifying to think of.
That is really creepy. Like,
Like,
I
it's-
don't like.
So when you look at all those things, it's like, so when you look at what happened to Madeleine, it's either that Christian guy who did it, these orphanage scammer people who did it, this woman who's expecting her new child or something to do with that did it, or this. Remember, then there was like the report they mentioned briefly about a masked man who would like break into people's homes. Maybe that is Christian, I guess, if he was breaking and entering, it could be tied to that. But like, because like this documentary came out before that whole revelation about Christian came out, so he's not mentioned at all in the documentary. So I'm like, well, maybe some of the things that they do mention are like tied to Christian. They just didn't know that at the time, because like they do mention that masked man who, like, I think
Yeah,
they do, or someone
that's
does.
true.
I don't know. I've watched a lot of I feel like I'm watching a lot of things, so it's like all mixed in which one it mentions what.
Yeah, so the Netflix documentary, I think, it doesn't mention Christian at all. And so it probably came out before they even had that, or had enough to say it was him. And I'm thinking, like, yeah, some of these theories could be all the same person. They just don't know that it's the same person, or the same group of people involved, right? Like, the people breaking into houses could be, you know, related to Christian and that kind of thing. So,
I'm wondering if like that lady who was talking about like, do you have my new daughter, could be like someone like that Christian knows, like a girlfriend, or like someone that he's involved with, and like
I don't know. It doesn't seem like he's the kind of guy that would be like, yeah, I'll steal a kid for you. Like he seems like, I'm gonna steal a kid for myself and then kill them. Like I'm not gonna give him to you.
Yeah,
but also, why would this woman go up to a random person on the street and be like, are you have my new daughter? Like it's weird.
Yeah,
like without knowing for sure if it's this guy. Like just
yeah, it's like, well, do you see me with a kid? Like, do I have a kid with me? And be like, no,
yeah.
I don't know.
Like that's
why
super
go up
weird.
to that person? Like, yeah, why risk going up to a random stranger and saying that?
But like, also, who was it that said that? Was it this man that then came forward and said someone came up to me, or like this? Like,
yeah, I think the
someone
guy
who's involved, like trying to like throw off a red herring.
Well, I think the guy that she approached came forward to police, and then he's the one that described her, and that's where the sketch came from.
Oh yeah, like this. Oh, this woman came up to me and said, "Do you have my new daughter?" Like that's so weird. Like, why would she? Like,
yeah,
well,
it could have been somebody mentally disturbed as well. That's like, you know, doesn't know what's happening. She's like confused about something, and she just went up to somebody random. Might have nothing to do with the kidnapping, but yeah, just coincidental at the timing.
It's just like one of those cases that feels it's like, how can one case have so many, like either a red herring or like, and also like this place seems hella dangerous. Like, I mean, there's all these random people breaking into houses, like trying to scam you for money or trying to like, it's just crazy. I mean, Portugal's a lovely place. I went there. Beautiful, safe. I never felt unsafe, but also I'm also not like a 3-year-old girl or a 3-year-old child.
People
either,
were saying that town is safe. Like people come to visit tourists, it's safe. People leave their doors unlocked, like it's safe. Every place is safe until it's not, right? And now so people have a different view of this place because of what happened. And yeah, so
I never leave my door unlocked.
It's crazy. Like I just think it's like, I don't know. It's like, so all of the, because Madeleine went missing, that's why all of these other things became known. Like the report about that woman or like these people asking about the orphanage, like all of that came out because of Madeleine's disappearance. So like that could have just be like goes to show you that there's all these other sketchy things that are happening that just nobody knows about.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It never ever comes forward.
And none of this stuff gets reported until a huge thing like this breaks and just happened to be this like little girl that went missing. Because like yeah, if Madeleine didn't go missing, like we wouldn't know about like the orphanage scam. Like who's gonna report and care about that? Like nobody, because it's not a high profile, you know, little girl that went missing.
Yeah. And like it is creepy to think like, you know, there are like the stories and stuff where it's like, you know, child just sex trafficking and all of that is like huge, like multi-billion-dollar disgusting operation. So it's like this huge like network of underground people. So it's like it's probably happening in all pockets of the world, all corners of the world. That like, so this one little town in Portugal is just like one sort of like representation of that, but it's like happening everywhere, which is so scary.
Because nobody can find them. It's all like the dark web. Like you can't get to the, like it's all like a website. Like just think of like just like social networks like Facebook. It's like that, but for people, like specific people that have this website. And so it's just
and it's like,
and like nobody can get there unless you know somebody that knows it and can tell you about it. So like not everyone's just gonna know about it. And like and one of the things on this 60 Minutes episode also, it was like you can't get into these like pedophile rings and websites unless you like produce like a picture of a kid that no one's ever seen before to prove that you're one of them. So you can't just find the
creepy
produce it. Yeah, you have to have some new material to show that.
That's like super disturbing.
It is, and that's
the most disturbing things I've heard.
That's
today.
Like investigators and police can't just get in there because you know they can't do that kind of thing to prove that they're one of them because they're not. So it's very secretive, underground, like specific people. And it's like $1 billion industry, so of course they're going to protect it.
That's terrifying.
And it's like creepy. It's like, well, don't they have that investigator on the documentary who was like going into the dark web? Like he somehow got into it. He's like an investigator, right? And then he says like, he's like, I also feel bad for him. He's like, the things I've seen on the dark web, like you can't just unsee that. Or like he has to pretend to be one of them and like partake in these chat room, like fucking disgusting. So it's so crazy to think. And it's like, yeah, it's not like you would never just stumble upon it online. Like it's like a very like you have to know someone who can let you in.
Yeah,
so fucking disgusting.
It really is disgusting. And that's like one of the guys was saying too, like in that documentary, it's like they should put as much effort as they put into like counterterrorism as they do into like pedophile rings and stuff like that. Like they pump like billions of dollars into counterterrorism and like just millions into pedophile rings. So it's like they need to step it up, I feel, because it's like one of the worst things that happens in the world is, you know, child sex rings. What's worse than that?
It's so disgusting. And also, like, I don't know, it's like almost a part of me, it's like sad to say, but like I don't know how to say this without sounding like drastic, but it was like a part of me almost hopes Madeline's dead, because if she's still alive and being subjected to that depravity and torture every single day, like that's almost worse than if she was just killed.
I know, it does seem like it's worse.
How many children have gone missing that are actually in these like sex rings? Like there's so many children like through the years of who've gone missing that could be in these sex rings. Like there's just like so many cases out there that have children gone missing, and like how many of those children have never been found that could be in these sex rings like for years and years. Like it's just so sickening to think of.
Well, yeah, it's like hundreds of thousands. Like in that documentary, they have like that binder of like, because somebody had found this website with all these kids, and like you just go through, like that woman just going through all these pictures to see if she can find her son. It's like super sad and scary, and like just like holy frig, like what these people are going through, like the kids. Can't imagine.
Yeah, it's so fucking disgusting.
I would say, AJ, I do agree with you. Like, I hope Madeleine is dead, as sad as that sounds, because I don't want to think that she's like, what? This is how many years have she been missing?
Yeah, like if it's been like 14 years. Yeah,
and to think that she could still be alive, but in that type of environment, like you almost wish that she's.
But also too, it's like they mentioned that in the documentary too. It's like with any missing child, it's like the not knowing is the worst, right? Like the parents every single day. It's like you never know if today's the day where I'm going to get that phone call where like she's been found or something, right? So it's like had that agony. It's like almost, at least if like you had, at least if they knew, it's like okay, they know. But it's like the what ifs would be like torturous.
Yeah, definitely. That's why he's saying like not knowing is worse than, you know, finding out that she's dead, because at least you have closure and you know what happened and you could just put it to rest, kind of thing. But I can't imagine not knowing. Just imagine being a parent and just like not knowing what happened to your kid. Like it's just the worst feeling, I feel.
I feel like you could never ever just relax, ever, because you never know.
No, you'd never be able to.
But yeah, I was also surprised too that like nothing, you know how sometimes in like long-term missing persons cases where it's like they consider someone dead, like they don't have the body but they just like declared dead or something. Like I'm also surprised like with that whole revelation that came out with the Christian, it's like why they wouldn't have just like, okay, she's missing but we're going to declare her legally dead or something. Like
they would have to reveal proof as to why they think that, I think, and they're just not ready to do that. They're just keeping it close to them until they can make that conclusion.
Because I mean, I feel like they did that for another case I'm thinking of right now is like the Natalie Holloway case, who went missing in Aruba or whatever, like back in 2006, like, or 2005 or whatever. Like they declared her legally dead and they never found her body. But like there was no like, I feel like if you have evidence that they're dead, they're dead. So it's like, how do you declare them legally dead without having enough evidence to prove that they're dead? You know what I mean?
And that's even worse though, like for the parent as well. Like the police are saying like your child's dead but they don't have their body. Like you have a funeral but no body. Like doesn't even feel real. Like you had like, it just, I don't know, I feel like you can't,
it's like excruciating. You can't mourn.
yeah. You can't,
it's like, where
declare
are they?
somebody
like,
dead without a body.
Like where are they? Yeah, and never knowing like where the remains ended up, like that's, you just don't know. It'd be awful.
It's like crazy to think like as if they had like found her body like right away. It's like, okay, that would have been 14 years. Like, obviously you're not ever over it, but you're like, they could have, you know, gone through the mourning process or the grief process and could have at least by now sort of had some sort of closure. But now it's like, can't ever do that. It's like the grieving process, but like for 14 years.
Yeah, it'd just be awful. I can't imagine. But I think that, so I guess in conclusion, my feeling is that it is this Christian guy. I feel like they're just not releasing evidence because they just, you know, don't want to release everything yet, but they have enough. And that I feel like an update will be coming soon and he will be charged. That's what I feel. I hope.
You know, I guess if I had to say, I think like, yeah, I would have to say it's probably that Christian guy. Like that's the most solid thing they have. Like if the police are saying we have evidence to suggest he did it, like that's pretty.
Yeah, they seem so confident that it feels like it can't be anything other than that. Like you can't say, yeah, we officially say that she's dead and he did it without being that confident, you know?
Yeah. So I would say like my theory is probably that it is him, but I definitely don't think he acted alone. Like he was tipped off by somebody or he was like a part of some sort of ring of people or group of people. So I think that like even if they do prove it's him, I still think that there's other people that need to be brought to justice somehow who were involved in either tipping him off or whatever, or if maybe they were, if I don't know if he physically did it and then delivered her to someone else, or like you said, he's probably not in the business of doing it for other people, or if like somebody did it and brought her to him or something. Like I feel like there's someone else somewhere along the line who was involved, but I just don't know who.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Like I think this Christian guy is definitely the one who took Madeleine, and whether she is dead or alive, like that's, well, they're saying she's dead, so, but I don't really think, I don't know, I have a hard time believing that she's dead without them proving that there's like without a body. But anyways, but I'm hoping that like this person is the one that took Madeleine, and that way they can just like move on with the case and the parents can finally like know what happened to Madeleine. But he's never going to say what he actually did with her. But
I mean, he might, if they come up with the evidence and say it's him and we know it and he's captured, he might like to brag about it. He sounds like a pretty disgusting person. So
I was just going to say, like, he probably one of those people who likes to boast about stuff like that to make himself like feel superior.
Yeah, and like he might not be saying anything because he's only in jail for 7 years, so he's not going to risk saying something. But if they have enough evidence and like, well, you're going to be in jail forever anyway, he might be like, okay, well, here's what happened. I want the fame.
Yeah. So I think it's probably, I feel like it's like just on the cusp of being solved, but nothing's ever been like definitively 100% said yet.
I know. I just feel like any day there's just going to be like a headline breaking, like convicted or something. Or
it'll be nice to see
charged.
This case solved, because unlike the like John Bonet case, like it's so hard, and when a case goes on for this long and not being solved, it's just so frustrating. So I'm hoping this case gets solved and people can just move on and get closure. Yeah,
at least this case there's like a solid suspect, and like John Bonet, it's still a complete mystery.
Yeah, and it's like almost, it's like as every year passes, it's like it's less likely with each year that it's going to be solved. But maybe this one, there's hope for this one, at least.
Yeah, we'll definitely be on the lookout for an update for this one, for sure.
Yeah, so that's the Madeleine McCann case. Do any of you have any final thoughts, or?
No, I was gonna say, like, I felt like there's so many other there's so many cases we could pick from, but I felt like this one, just because of the new evidence, I felt like this one was a good one to go with because it's not solved yet.
Well, I mean, yeah, like it's similar. Like the season 1 finale, we did the unsolved, like John Bonet. Now this one, the Madeleine McCann, like similar cases. So I guess for season 3, we'll do another high-profile unsolved one. So yeah, that's it for season 2. Do you guys have any thoughts about the season as a whole, or some sneak peeks of season 3? What are you guys thinking? What's coming up?
It was definitely a more, like, I want to say, time-consuming season, because we had, and very interesting because we had a lot of it, like, important guests and a lot of important cases, and it was just, I had a fun time, like, learning and like researching a lot of different cases.
Yeah, I feel like season 2 is definitely, we tackled some interesting, a wide kind of sort of a vast array of different cases, but also like super important. Like we did the miniseries for the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and then we did like, the Botham Jean one, who was like, that one was like Black Lives Matter sort of thing. So we have been tackling wrongful convictions, stuff like that, domestic violence. So we've kind of tried to tackle important topics and like keep everyone interested. And like season 3, we'll probably have some more guests lined up for you, kind of working behind the scenes to get that all lined up for you right now. And
maybe on location? No, I'm just kidding.
On location? Where? In Portugal. Let's go.
Yeah.
We're going to record outside the apartment 5A. Stay tuned for that.
Yeah, nothing to do with Madeleine McCann, but we'll just talk about other things.
So we will be back for season 3 in a short amount of time. We also have our merch store. Very exciting that we're working on that. We also have probably a website that we're going to design and get up and running somewhat soon.
Yeah,
right?
We'll see. It's in the works, but
we have a lot of things in the works, and we have some cases. Of course, it all comes back to the cases that we're going to do, and we're going to be thinking about cases we want to do. We're going to have another miniseries, I'm sure.
Now is like the perfect time if you have if you want to reach out, like you have a case that you want us to cover or something. Like now's the perfect time because we're like in the works of planning season 3, so you can definitely fit stuff in still.
Yeah, like it's so much easier to like fit a case in once you suggest one versus like once we already have it all planned out which cases we're doing and then we get like a really good one through email. It's like we can make it work, but like for the sake of time, if you want it timely, then reach out. Definitely interact with us online and social media because we want to know what you think of the show, and that's how we continue to make good content. Is we know what you guys like. If we don't know what you like, we can't improve and we can't offer it.
And if you like some merch, stay tuned for the merch store. Very exciting stuff.
Yes, so definitely if you are interested in merch or you're like you want to see some things, that follow us on social media because that's where we're going to post like all the updates about when it's going to be released and maybe some sneak peeks of some of the designs or the items that you can buy on the merch store. So follow us on social media at Crime Family Podcast on Instagram or Crime Family Pod 1 on Twitter. And we are on Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. And our email is crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. So, yeah, had a lot of fun doing season 2. And season 3 will be bigger and better. Bye. See you next season.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.